Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar.
He designed shoes, clothes, sang music, and owned some 24,000 books. He ruled 150 million subjects, and yet he couldn't read or write. His name was Akbar, meaning great. Truly a man who lived up to his name, and one who established a reputation that continues to be his hallmark for all time. Jalal-ud-Din Akbar, the third and greatest of the Muslim Mughal emperors, was a practical visionary. He saw India as one nation and spent his reign wresting it into shape. He thwarted a rebellion here, took over a kingdom there, and even married a Hindu princess to seal a political alliance. Like a conductor, he used one hand to speed the country toward physical unity, the other to guide it to reformation and renaissance. Through religion and the arts, he found a unified voice for his fragmented subcontinent. Akbar was a man of tremendous energy and power, and his physical stature is described by a member of the Jesuit mission that resided at the Mughal court during the 1580s as being
of good stature, with sturdy body, arms and legs, and broad-shouldered. The configuration of his face is ordinary and does not reflect the grandeur and dignity of the person, because, besides being Chinese-like, as the Mughals usually are, it is lean, sparse of beard, wrinkled, and not very fair. The eyes are small, but extremely vivid, and when he looks at you, it seems as if they hurt with their brightness. And thus nothing escapes his notice, be it a person or something trivial. And they also reveal sharpness of mind and keenness of intellect. And so he is very much feared by his subjects. To his people, he displays a certain amount of cheerfulness, which in no way detracts from his imperial being. He dresses plainly.
He may have dressed plainly, but he designed many of his shoes and clothes himself, and his interests spread to a myriad of things, including the building of his magnificent capital city of Fatehpur Sikri, whose seed was sown in the year that his son Salim, the future Emperor Jahangir, was born. It is a well-known fact that Akbar was intensely involved in the building of his capital, and it was said,
Akbar is so devoted to building that he sometimes quarries stone himself along with other workmen.
Slowly, he built his own court. The court of the great Mughal, lusty, refined, resplendent, outshining his contemporaries, Elizabeth of England and Philip of Spain. A galaxy of talents, welding different states, races and religions into a political whole. Administrators and painters, economists and poets, soldiers and musicians, many Rajputs in high office, and the incomparable singer, Tansen. Akbar could accept no dogma. He invited Muslims of different sects, Jesuit and Jain, Hindu and Zoroastrian, to discourse on each other's truths, so that there might emerge one religion uniting the best from all. The creative energies of the Hindus and Muslims flowered into a new expression of Indian culture. This was the golden age of Hindi poetry and Mughal painting.
However, little is known about Akbar's private life, except that it was spent between a number of secluded apartments and the harem. The main palace, with its numerous private cells and baths, was zealously guarded on the inside by eunuchs and on the outside by royal Rajput soldiers and nobles such as Raisal Darbari, who was keeper of the imperial harem. In general, Akbar spent the late evening hosting discussions and the early morning in private contemplation, at which times he visited the harem, is unclear. This figure of a courtesan with a vibrant orange and red skirt and mustard yellow bodice gives us a rare glimpse into the life of women at Akbar's court. The lively diva, perhaps a dancer or singer, is captured in an intimate moment as she applies collyrium to her eyes with the help of a small hand mirror.
His harem, 300 women of many races.
Nindiyan aave ali rain aise naina lage haan nindiyan aave ali rain bhavan
Akbar's curiosity was boundless. His library reached 24,000 volumes by the time he died. Some he had inherited, some he had acquired through conquest, others he simply purchased, and those he could not find, he commissioned. Akbar maintained his desire for knowledge throughout his life, and the Kitab Khana or Imperial Library was the center of manuscript production and painting. It was vast and made up of several units devoted to a variety of functions, and experienced people read Akbar various translations of books daily. And he never tired of hearing a book over and over again. In 1582, Akbar commissioned a translation of work from Sanskrit to Persian, and the great epic, the Mahabharata, was the assigned task. The project was completed in 1584, after which the Ramayana was translated and the illustrations by the Imperial Studio's best artists accompanied both these masterpieces. Apart from being the center of manuscript production, Akbar's Kitab Khana was also the principal repository for the imperial collection of manuscripts and albums of paintings and calligraphies. Akbar's collection can be divided into two broad categories: Persian manuscripts and paintings, and non-Persian, mainly European ones. Akbar was fascinated with representations of the Madonna and Child, and this supremely elegant miniature of both the Madonna and the Child within a wholly Mughal setting is completed by two unidentified couplets set into gold floral arabesques at the top and bottom of the page. Akbar's patronage of the arts was not limited to the Kitab Khana, and he also supported a vast network of imperial workshops that produced everything from perfumes to clothes, guns and tents. The emperor took a keen interest, bordering on the obsessive, in the various items produced. The emperor's desire to learn the trades of his craftsmen grew out of his conviction that ideas must be tempered by experience.
But in Akbar ran the furious energy of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. Living the life of 10 men, sleeping but 3 hours a day. Since his early youth, he had been constantly at war, attacking.
Akbar inherited an empire in 1556 that was fragmented and unstable. Against incredible odds, he expanded his territory and brought the Hindi and Muslim factions at his court into a strong and lasting union. Through a series of social and administrative reforms, he also changed the very structure of Indian life. It is this combination of dynamism, ambition and political skill that makes Akbar such a fascinating figure. To share their vision of Akbar and his times are Michael Brand, curator of the Rhode Island School of Design, and Glenn Lowry, curator of the Freer Art Museum in Washington. Michael, both you and Glenn have spent 5 years before the onset of the exhibition in preparing for it. Tell me, what was your aim in reaching out for this intricate task?
I think our first idea was to try to focus attention on one place and one person. Most exhibitions previously on Mughal India, or the arts of Mughal India, have tried to cover the whole Mughal empire, or sort of 2 or 3 of the emperors. So we had the idea of trying to focus on one person, one spot, and Fatehpur Sikri seemed the best place to focus on it.
And is the aim of the exhibition the same as when you first began work on the project?
The aim is the same, but having researched it over these years, we've sort of had many more ideas, and so the certain directions have changed, or we found out more information, more interesting information about Akbar and his, especially on his political theory, and that has perhaps broadened our aim, but the basic aim is the same.
Oh yes, and the concept remained the same. The exhibition actually grew out of a slightly larger project that we're still very much involved with. We were interested in trying to look at a moment, a historical moment, and a city contextually, both in terms of the works of art that were produced at the city, but also in terms of what actually happened at Fatehpur Sikri. Why did Akbar build it? How did he build it? What were the issues that were central to that? And so we started off with the idea of a symposium focused on Fatehpur Sikri that would bring together international scholars, with an exhibition in conjunction with the symposium, so that we would have a kind of unique opportunity to study the whole range of activities. And so what happened is, as both projects grew, the symposium took on its own identity and the exhibition took on another identity.
Akbar seems to be a multifaceted man who became the 3rd Mughal Emperor of India at the age of 14. What kind of a life do you think he lived? I mean, he died at the age of 63.
Well, it was certainly a very long reign. He ruled from 1556 to 1605, almost 50 years. And it's really, Akbar is really the one who created the Mughal Empire in India. Certainly his grandfather Babur had first come into India and established the nucleus of the empire. His father Humayun had inherited that, lost it briefly. Instead of just being a government for a small band of people from Central Asia, it became a government interacting with the Rajputs in Rajasthan and various other people throughout India.
What do you think Akbar had in mind when he built Fatehpur Sikri?
I suspect that when he started the project, he had a rather vague notion of trying to define for himself a space, an environment in which he could perhaps organize his empire on a microcosmic level as he wished it to be constructed, and that as the project developed from its very earliest stages in the beginning of the 1570s into the 1580s, when Akbar, of course, had matured tremendously, when his empire was far more secure, it became ever more specific. But I think he saw it as an evolutionary process. I don't think there was a master plan at the very beginning to have the city look a certain way, but that as it developed, and we know that construction at the city went on virtually throughout the period of its occupation, from early 1570s into the middle of the 1570s, and there were buildings under construction virtually at the moment when he abandoned the city in 1585. So I think he had a vague idea that became ever more concrete as he was able to define each new idea and give it a kind of formal context.
Having seen the beautiful paintings from the exhibition, I've noticed that in some Akbar is depicted actualizing the building of his capital. Now, in an age and time where the emperor gave the order and the work was just done, doesn't it seem slightly curious that Akbar would go as far as actually carrying the bricks alongside the workers?
think what makes Akbar so exciting to study as a historical figure is the fact that he took a very direct involvement in many of the empire's activities. Obviously, on a military and political level, he was directing the empire's development, but I think he saw architecture as a means of expressing dynastic visions and ambitions, and consequently took a direct involvement with it. We know from recorded sources of the time that not only did he supervise the construction of the city, thereby giving it his imprint, but he also participated in quarrying stone and so on. He even is reputed to have developed a system for the prefabrication of parts of the city, individual parts of buildings, that would be quarried and prepared outside the city walls or the immediate environment of the city, then brought in and fit into place once in the city, so that it would cut down on the noise of construction, which gives one a sense of the building being constructed while the emperor was physically there. So I think he was a man who took very direct involvement because he saw it as perhaps an expression of imperial interest and power.
Akbar was essentially a Muslim, and yet he appeared to have a philosophy that affected him very deeply. What sort of a philosophy do you think he had?
I think it was essentially a philosophy of exploration and of curiosity, which perhaps has a lot to do with the very age he was born into. And I think it was really a curiosity. He remained throughout his reign a Muslim king, there's no doubt about that. He built mosques, he attended, he worshipped in the mosques. And in his house of worship that he constructed in Fatehpur Sikri in 1575, he was encouraging the exploration of other people's ideas, and specifically the ideas of different groups within India, of Hindu philosophers or Jain theologians or Parsis, and of course the Jesuits from Europe as well.
Akbar believed very much that he was a visionary, and the tool that he used to perpetuate this vision was art. Can you elaborate on this?
That's a hard question off the top of my head.
Well, I think one can see this to a large extent as a means for Akbar to explore many of the ideas that he had. That is, art, and not painting alone, but the creation of images, was a way for Akbar to put into form ideas, dynastic, political, whatever, that were current at the court at the time. And through art, he had a means of exploring his world. The most obvious analogy is the development of a series of portrait paintings done for the emperor of his various courtiers, but that included also studies of landscapes and animals. And whether or not these were absolutely direct impressions of those various courtiers, they served a purpose because they allowed the emperor in quiet to examine someone else's impression of a courtier, of a landscape, to gain insight through that kind of examination. So I think art served for Akbar a very important function. And it wasn't a function limited just to manuscript paintings. It was a function that spread to all elements of the empire, which is again one of the reasons why architecture, the creation of visible forms that the public at large would have seen, even if it were only the facade of a palace, played such an important part for Akbar that he participated in it. He wanted control over it.
Basically, you know, what you're saying is that he was an ambitious man.
I think that he was a wildly ambitious man. You do not create, consolidate, and develop an empire such as his without enormous ambition and without an incredible vision of what that empire should be like, because in many ways the ideas that he formulated became cornerstones for the concept of a modern India today. I think this notion of religious tolerance that is clearly something that runs throughout Akbar's reign is one that has to be seen in light of the political importance of trying to satisfy a very diverse population ruled by a minority. He had to come up with ways of dealing with it. He had a mind creative enough to understand its beneficial aspects, but he also realized that politically there was no way to rule a united India, or what he saw as a united India, without incorporating those elements of the empire that were outside of the Muslim faith.
I think also within his art, he was attempting, within his vision of what an emperor should be, to record that. And it's interesting that he had an album of portraits made up of all his courtiers, but from his reign we don't know of any single portrait of Akbar himself standing there in a formal pose.
There's no denying that Akbar had grandiose ambitions, and he sought to make himself the very center of his empire. Now, in all the paintings and the objects depicted, one gets a feeling that he's seen as he wanted people to see him. But in your opinion, what sort of a man do you think he was?
He comes across as a man sort of dedicated to action. I mean, very much aware of his self-image, very much aware of being seen in the right place at the right time. So I think he comes across as a sort of hard-working person in a way. It's the images of him in the manuscripts in many ways don't reveal much of his sort of real personality. They're very much an official figure, acting officially. You get very little idea of his personality behind that.
Could you add to that, Glenn? Because I'm sure there was a sincere, very touching and sensitive side to the man.
I suspect there was. It's very hard to get a handle on Akbar as an individual, as a private man, because the Akbarnama, his official biography, clearly was written to record the emperor in minute detail, but to record it in a way that obviously was favorable to him. And it presents him throughout that constantly as a public figure. And of course, the paintings that illustrate the Akbarnama are virtually icons of the emperor. On the other hand, the unofficial histories of his reign are critiques of him, but they're critiques for the most part of his public presence rather than his private stance. I think, however, that he was so intensely self-conscious of his actions that it's hard for me sometimes to imagine the private side of him, that he was someone who was very much aware that every move he made had a significance, was recorded, was seen. That's why every morning he began his public presence by a kind of ritual of being seen at his jaroka, his window, to let the empire know, let the population know that he was alive, but also to see him, to realize that he was in control. And that started out the morning. If you follow the chronicles of his daily ritual, there are very few moments when you catch him retiring unobserved. And in fact, he must have been a nightmare to work for, because the chronicles record that he was idiosyncratic in his eating habits. He would eat once a day, but virtually never at the same hour. So you can imagine a court having to keep up with these odd eating habits, the odd sleeping habits. He was dynamic, but I think the private side of him is very difficult to grasp. And in fact, I think that ultimately there may not have been a private Akbar, or possibly not even a public Akbar, that there was an Akbar, a creation of his vision of himself, acted out on the stage of a city like Fatehpur Sikri, or on the countryside in campaigns, so carefully orchestrated that it becomes impossible to distinguish what was an intimate and private moment against what was in fact part of the imperial act, for lack of a better word.
It was really quite a performance.
Well, Michael and Glenn, thank you both very much for taking the time to join us in this exhibition.
Akbar was never to give up a life of action. Here was an administrator of genius, a mighty political architect who saw the oneness of man.
has dazzled the people of New York and indeed most of the world this past year with a grand display of its arts and crafts as the part of the ongoing Festival of India. But a major extravaganza, a jewel in the crown so to speak, is the costumes of Royal India here at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. Imagine, if you would, the darkest night of the year, Diwali, where the stars in the sky are rivaled here on earth by the women dressed in their beautiful costumes of black and gold. The lighting of the candle here is almost a symbolic gesture, welcoming us into a world that no longer exists, but once seen is never forgotten. A bewildering variety of colour, style and technique, the exhibit doesn't attempt a representation, just a mere selection. Even so, the textures, tones and workmanship speak of the sophistication and the sensuality of the Indian people. Symbology of motif and colour are integral to the Indian design concept. This shimmering black dupatta with a winking floral motif is worn at Diwali when the stars are at their zenith and the night pitch black. The dancing peacocks with their magnificent plumage augur abundant rainfall and a prosperous harvest. The gentleman from Gwalior lounges nonchalantly on the bed swing and is swathed in an angarka, which literally means protector of the limbs. Cavalryman's garb, the angarka was hoped to protect its wearer from the enemy's arrows. Another popular garment for women was the Farsi pajama, voluminous pantaloons that were draped over the arms or trailed as she made her dainty way through the zenana. This particular pajama is emblazoned with the motif of the sun. The dupatta has shimmering crescents of rubies and emeralds. It is a bridal costume and is hoped it will propitiate this royal lady's marriage. An entire section of the exhibit is devoted to men's costumes. The variety is chastening, the craftsmanship stupendous. This deep purple velvet coat from the former Maharaja of Patiala boasts a most ecclesiastical design concept garnered from Russia, China and Afghanistan. The brilliant border accent is probably from Afghanistan. The flowers can be likened to the tree of life which arises out of the pot of plenty. Paisley in the Indian design vocabulary is representative of the mango or almond. Traditionally turban ornaments, they are symbols of good fortune. The Achtum Sukh, which literally means protector of the soul, is an imposing quilted robe lined with paper which protected the wearer from the bitter Rajasthani cold. These exceedingly tall mannequins display robes of the Maharajas of Jaipur and Kota, whose Amazonian proportions, 6 foot 9 inches and 6 foot 8.5 inches, resulted in a shared wardrobe. The war drums or the Nagaras are from Gujarat and are reportedly the largest in the world. They were struck to signal the commencement of war, and on the demise of a monarch, their skins were split open to be restrung at the coronation of a new king. Far removed from the pomp and pageantry of the Mughal era was the original concept of kingship, as intoned in the Artha Shastra, which stated that a king is no more or less than a servant of his people. All that separates him from them is the cushion or gaddi. The gaddi remained, but the overt trappings of power and wealth elevated the king's position from a servant of his people to that of a demigod. This superb example of turquoise velvet is from the former Maharaja of Jamnagar. Amber, diamond, lapis, pearl and jade bespeak the splendor of a forgotten era. This embroidery shows marked Chinese influences and has been woven in Benares since the 18th century. Fabrics such as these adorn the sacred altars of the Dalai Lama in Tibet and are often found bordering image of the Buddha. This majestic war elephant sports a handsome beaten silver head ornament adorned with images of Hindu deities. It is believed that the images of these deities protected the elephant from enemy weapons, as does the metal itself. And how could one possibly move in a coat such as this one? It weighs approximately 28 pounds and is probably the most expensive garment in the world. Of heavy gold embroidery and clusters of brilliant precious stones, this ceremonial cloak was worn by the Maharajas of Arcot in southeast India. The cherub in the gilded cradle is probably the heir apparent, judging by his ornate attire. The surrounding mirrors were used to deflect the evil eye. Clearly a precursor to the Nehru jacket, this coat bears the royal insignia. The curious insignia on this brocade is a print on fabric and not a photograph of the Maharaja's father. The coiled waistband simulates the coat of arms, an exquisitely fashioned cobra. The jungle motifs on this 80-yard-long skirt have symbolic references. The lady seated in a palanquin was carried around the women's quarters or zenana by her band of attendants. Green is essentially an Islamic colour. In desert regions, green signals an oasis, therefore life. Embroidered in gold and silver thread, they were the final signature to the apparel of a courtier. It is said the dainty feet of princesses were measured with a string of pearls, the largest cast away in a gesture of poetic excess. In Hindu rituals, leather is considered impure. Hence, the materials such as ivory and metal were used to adorn the feet of royalty. This illustration is from the companion volume to the exhibit, A Second Paradise. Naveen Patnaik, the author of the book, worked closely with Diana Vreeland, curator of this exhibition, and spoke to us about the symbolism of colour which is so integral to this exhibition. Naveen, there were so many beautiful colours in that exhibition, but the one colour that came to mind straight away was the colour white. It's such a pure, almost unreal colour, and we all know that all the colours of light, when combined together, give you white. Now, white must have a symbolic meaning in India. I know it does. But does it differ through the various states?
It does indeed. In fact, in South India, they have such poetic names for white as the white of the jasmine flower, the white of the conch shell, the white of the August moon, the white of the clouds when the rain is spent. And although these are ancient names for the various whites, if you still go to buy or order different shades of white, you can order them by these names.
How beautiful. That's very beautiful. Now, I know in some parts of India, white is the colour of mourning.
Yes.
Which is obvious to me why.
Yes.
But what about other states in India? Is that
Well, in Rajasthan, they have different colors for mourning. For instance, widows in Rajasthan wear greens and blues instead of white.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know, but it may have to do something with, I mean, if you leave aside mourning, in the desert areas of India, they wear very bright colors. Now, this has nothing to do with mourning, we're just talking about normal day-to-day colors, because their landscape is so bare. And while in the south it's so tropical and so lush, they tend to wear whites because it makes a wonderful contrast to the horizon. So it's, you know, it's thought of very practically besides being aesthetic.
Yes, but it's very lovely to. I wish I could order white by all those lovely names.
You can.
Not here, though.
But it is South India, yes.
Yes, that's right. Okay, Naveen, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Yards of fabric wound in astonishing shapes, decorated with jeweled pendants or crown-like ornaments called the sarpej, were indicative of the person's region and, more importantly, their social status in life. The height of the brocade weaver's art is exemplified in this shawl, draped over this canopied gaddi. This collection of men's costumes from different regions bespeak the variety of textiles and sophistication of Indian dress. A grand finale to this colourful exhibit are the saris, which are a representation of the whole kaleidoscope of colour, costume and custom in India, and are displayed here in a brilliant range of resplendent fabrics and attractive styles. The sari, supremely elegant in its simplicity and practical in its versatility, is the Indian woman's national dress, which bestows on her the grace of womanhood. It reasserts the skillful craftsmanship and creativity of the art of Indian textiles. Costumes of Royal India is the brainchild of Diana T. Vreeland. A former editor of Vogue, she has made her name and face as famous as the models on the magazine covers and remains a strong force that fashion pundits remain in awe of. To Diana Vreeland, there's no mystery about her half-century in the spotlight, and she has a lot to show for it, as Stephen Jamal remarked.
The exhibitions themselves tend to point directions, and Mrs. Vreeland, who's been a leader in this field for 50 years, has always been out front. Wherever the world of fashion was going, she seemed to get there a little before. So what they do is they look to her for guidance, and it's been true up to now, and I have no reason to believe that it won't be true this year too.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. But what do you think the costumes of Royal India will inspire in design? Let's hear your
I hope it's probably going to be all the wrong things. I would hope that they would concentrate on the combinations of colors, because Americans are very afraid of colors. So if anything, it would be wonderful if some of the American fashion people could be inspired to take on some of these strong colors and adapt them to their use. I love the whites myself. They are so beautiful in their simplicity. I would like to think that that might have an influence. It's really, it's strange, but as we put the exhibition together, I realized that Royal India had already influenced Western fashion to such an enormous extent that it was a big surprise to me. Many of these costumes, I'm speaking now of the women's costumes, slightly adapted could walk down the runway of, say, Saint Laurent in the next collection. And I think beginning with maybe Poiret and the Tins and certainly Chanel later, the influence of the way that the courts of the East dress certainly came to the West. And this may just remind them that this is where it all began.
Martin Singh, born into the royal lifestyle, acted as the coordinator of the exhibit. It culminated in an evening that figured prominent personalities, each with something to say.
Now that you've seen the exhibit and worked out, what's your first impression?
Well, I think it's gorgeous. I mean, it makes me want to go to India, you know, tomorrow. And I don't know whether I would prefer to be a man or woman in India. I mean, both costumes are just so fantastic.
What was your favorite part of the exhibit, if you could pick one?
Well, I was very interested with the colors because, you know, I've always been a color person. And as you can see, maybe with my stones, all those colors. And to see the combinations of bright colors with silver and gold is really fascinating.
How do you think this particular type of exhibit will affect the perception of India in the minds of people like you?
Oh, well, I was very much aware of India, but there are things that I'd never seen before. Those turbans with those little, I don't know what you would call it, little rolls of fabric I'd never seen before, and that was very impressed with that. And I really want to come back and look at, details.
It's actually so beautiful. I thought it was great.
The colors and the magnificence of India, it shows through. It's fantastic. But I'm going to come back by myself when nobody's here to be able to take in and look, because there's so much.
How do you think the average American is perceiving India in the light of what has happened here in the past few months? Mrs. Traub?
I think that this exposition has been wonderful for the Indian image in the United States. I think the average American really has no idea what India is. And when they see all these wonders, they begin to understand that there's a marvelous, exciting country out there that they should get on a plane and get to see.
What about you, Mr. Traub? What do you think is the impact that this exhibition is going to make in the long run? Besides being a 9-day wonder, what else do you think it's going to achieve?
Well, I think the exhibits and the festivals have really increased the awareness of the skills and talents of Indian craftsmen in textiles and other products, and I think they have to have long-term beneficial effects on trade between India and the United States, starting with Bloomingdale's, of course.
Are we going to see any product dedicated to India come out of the Della Rente line?
Well, I have always been sort of greatly inspired by India. I have been to India many, many times. So probably, there always will be something Indian in my collection.
And I wonder what went through this well-known lady's mind when she said this.
Well, hello in India. Are you doing your yoga today?
Well, one reason why I wanted to come tonight was my because of my affection for India. And it's a country that I have long loved. I know my wife has.
Yes, I love it. It's, I think, a most powerful experience.
Well, I visited your country 3 times, and I'm delighted to see so much warm, good feeling about your country here. And I think we look forward to seeing the exhibit. I'm sure it will be very beautiful.
You have been extremely involved with the Bergdorf promotion and promoting India in the United States. How do you think, in the long run, all this extravagant promotions, etc., is going to impact the average American's perception of India? Mr. Neiman?
Well, Bergdorf Goodman is promoting India because we believe there's a future for quality merchandise. And therefore our exhibit, which is similar to what we have here, we hope to be able to continue an Indian shop in Bergdorf Goodman to be your champion.
Costumes of Rural India has been prepared for the Metropolitan Museum by special consultant Diana Vreeland, who has summed up the enthusiasm behind a divinely inspired civilization. In our world today, she says, there is little splendor, and hopes this show will be, quote, a blackout from reality, unquote. I'm Sandhya for Bombay Broadcasting, here at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City.